Good evening. Let's see how we doing this evening, folks, on a beautiful Tuesday. Beautiful Tuesday evening. Lots of going on. I think Massachusetts has, we had our breaking news today, so we're going to start off with that, talking about what's happening here in Massachusetts, and then shift gears a little bit towards the end and just get kind of take a quick glance at and conversation about things that are happening across the landscape in the country. So the biggest news that dropped here in Massachusetts today was that one of our commissioners, one of the original commissioners for our Cannabis Control Commission, has announced that she's leaving, Commissioner Flanagan. Now, Commissioner Flanagan, she was assigned her position. She was appointed by the governor, specifically of the 5 commissioners. She was the one appointed by the governor, one of the ones appointed directly by the governor. And prior to joining the commission, the Cannabis Control Commission, her background was in serving in the House, both the House and the Senate in Massachusetts. So she has a really strong local base in parts of central and northern Massachusetts, if you will, out from the areas that she has served in the past before joining the commission. And so here it is. She joined the commission and has been there since its inception, and today announced that she was leaving. I think she was on must have been a 4-year term. And so technically her term would have ended at the end of this year, but she's leaving early, which, congratulations. Folks leave and move on. And upon first hearing of the news, I reflected on who I've seen Flanagan to be in her role and in the industry. And I will be, transparent with you all. If you have tracked with us over since Mass Mother Mary's inception, we've talked about our experience with Flanagan when we went to the commission's forum to talk about the issues that social equity and economic empowerment applicants were facing when it came to participating in the industry. This is before realizing what was actually happening, before realizing that the industry had actually been handed over to multi-state operators. So at that time, I spoke before the board and the commission and told them that you as a agency, as an independent agency here in Massachusetts, you have the authority and the leeway to enact a broad range of policies to support equity. And again, we calling this Cannabis Equity News, and I just jumped right in. So for those of you joining, welcome. You are live tonight with Cynthia Mompoint, touching on the Cannabis Equity News, and we're really focusing on what's happening in Massachusetts. The latest news that was presented today in Massachusetts. And so, back in January of 2019, now it was the CCC held a forum for folks to come in and weigh in on what their experience has been going through the licensing process. And after speaking and telling the CCC basically, hey, you guys can do a lot more than what you're doing. You can support the equity program participants significantly more than you have. After doing that, it was Flanagan that reached out to me and to my husband. And she reached out to me and she said, hey, I want to talk to you a little, it wasn't the social justice chair. So that was my first experience with Flanagan. I was just like, okay. And so we had some conversations about things that the commission can do. And those conversations continued for some time, just kind of going back and forth. And then it was pretty much not much conversation with Flanagan after that. She had her position very, while in the meetings, we see her consistently talk about positive impact plan. In our personal conversation, she was definitely a strong proponent for promoting women in business as well, and wanting to better understand the equity piece of it. So then fast forward to when we uncovered what amounted to the cannabis heist, the Colorado 6, the folks who really, they wrote on the legislation here in Massachusetts and then turned around and capitalized. And when I mean capitalized, they brought in their multi-state operators, their their constituents to take advantage of the equity period, if you will, the priority position that was specific for equity participants and existing operators, existing medical operators here in Massachusetts. And so we had hundreds of licenses, upwards of 200 plus licenses that were issued prior to any equity applicant getting a license, and it just wasn't making any sense. And then we realized, oh, okay, we have some key players. And when my husband and I exposed this information, presented it to the public, we had some vocal actors who were opposed this. Obviously, the social justice chair, who at the time was Shailene Title, who was one of the people that we identified as being a key component to the to this heist in terms of taking over the opportunity that was set aside for priority position, which is in the legislature. So the priority position, which is for the equity program participants, the economic empowerment participants, economic empowerment certificate holders, and the existing medical dispensaries that were operating in Massachusetts. That's who the priority status was meant to be for. However, we found out that the likes of Vicente Sederberg, Shailene Title, and so forth, and Forefront Ventures, they played key roles in drafting the legislation and providing the language in terms of who was going to get the priority. And then our legislature, in a closed meeting, went and modified that language to protect the citizens of Massachusetts, to say, hey, no, we want this to go to the people of Massachusetts. We want priority for the folks in Massachusetts. And then we fast forward to 2020, and we're looking at the 2019 into 2020, and we're looking at the numbers, and it's just not making sense. We had operators coming in, paying for positions, paying to say that they want to have a priority position and never opening up a medical dispensary. And so that created an even greater equity challenge here in Massachusetts, where we were poised, we still are, but we were poised to really be first in the nation in demonstrating, like, if you're going to be about the business of equity, you know, the rhetoric that's circulating in terms of wanting to address the war on drugs and the harms that were done by that, and really invest in those who have been harmed the greatest and give them the opportunity to enter into this industry that other states have demonstrated is highly competitive, is dominated by white male owners, is dominated by deep pockets. So Massachusetts put in several provisions to with the intention of eliminating that. And that's not what happened. In fact, the opposite happened. And after my husband and I not only exposed it, but we exposed it in a way. First, we reached out to the people who we recognized and said, hey, you are capitalizing on this priority status. And it violates what the legislation says. It violates the intention of the legislation, and it violates the citizens of Massachusetts. It violates the economic empowerment certificate holders, and we didn't stop there. We also provided a solution for that, and we didn't hear anything from that. We presented it to the public, and instead, the public decided they wanted to harp on local existing dispensaries for other reasons, and shroud the conversation around, wait a minute, the local Massachusetts citizens, the equity participants, those who were supposed to be getting the priority period, and the measures that were put in place to ensure that not only the citizens were served by people who cared about the community, meaning they had already been serving patients, and so now they would be able to do so recreationally, but also that those who were here in Massachusetts would be the first to get licenses. And a lot of folks silenced that conversation. And instead, what we ended up getting was a threat letter. And if you paid attention to any of the public meetings that were on Zoom last year after COVID shifted the way meetings were held. You would have heard me talk about this, where the CAB presented one of our solutions that we gave, which is the PIES program, which was a way to take the vehicles that existed in Massachusetts, which are the positive impact plans and the equity program and their participants, bridge them together and bring about real equity, because everyone was saying, hey, we're not seeing the needle move. We're not seeing licensees come through the process and get their license and open up in Massachusetts. And the reason was because their priority status was given away. It was given away to multi-state operators. We see Vicente Sederberg, in 2018 alone, were the representing attorneys on 50 host community agreements. And if you don't want to say that's some form of mini monopoly happening, just that this was in our first year of recreational legalization, when licensing was happening, then I don't know what you call that. And that's just the information that was presented and it's publicly available on the Cannabis Control website in their public documents. When you look, if you pull up their records, they had a report done on host community agreements. So after all of these multi-state operators leveraging their connection either with Vicente Sederberg or with Forefront Ventures or even Shailene Title, leveraging those connections, they were able to come in, obtain these licenses, and take that first mover's advantage and take that away from equity participants and tell the citizens of Massachusetts that they have to hold off on pursuing licenses and wait as general applicants, because there are priority people who we want to ensure that they enter into the industry because of their experience and the harms that they experience from the drug war. So here we have it. Fast forward. Why does all of this matter? Well, when we exposed the Colorado 6, we reached out directly to them. And the response that we got was not from the Colorado 6, it was from the Cannabis Control Commission. So the CCC, their attorney, reached out to us. And so immediately we said, wait a minute, are you now serving as the attorney for these independent businesses that have been able to dominate and capitalize on the priority period here in Massachusetts? And that was the first flag for us that, wait a minute, the Cannabis Control Commission is playing a role in the fact that equity are playing a more active role, not so much the passive role that they presented to make it seem as though they weren't sure as to what they can do. It was more active. They not only defended and created a dike between our communication with the Colorado 6 and positioned themselves as the ones to say, hey, no, there was nothing wrong happening here. And these licenses that were issued, yes, in October of 2019, we did identify that these licenses should not have gone out the way that they were issued. But you know what? We're going to just let all of these folks be grandfathered in and keep moving forward, and never addressing the additional injustice and harm that was done to equity program participants. And we see here today Commissioner Flanagan announcing that although she's not an attorney, she is going to leverage her regulatory experience working with municipalities and so forth, and joining none other than Vicente Sederberg on the national front. And it's disheartening to see, to think that we have folks that we put into these positions who you want to say that they have the interest of the citizens of the state, the interest of the people, but in fact, it's the people against profit, right? That's what we always say we want. We don't want to see that, but that's what we see happening. And it sheds a greater light as to what we see happening. And just for the record, that threat letter still stands. There has not been an apology from the commission, and we've made it clear to the commission as to what our position was. We want to hold folks accountable. We want to hold folks accountable for the role that they played in the industry. And then we also want to hold folks accountable who are in positions of public service for us. So here it is. This is what we see happening. And we hear today that Commissioner Flanagan has moved on up to working on the national front and advising states that are going legal. And for those of you who are in other states and you have representatives coming from states that have already gone legal, make sure you hold them accountable for the equity measures that they're putting in, because the rhetoric is strong. You have to look at the legislation. You have to look at the policies that they're putting out, because while the rhetoric may be strong, implementation of that rhetoric, the actions that they tie to it, tell a different story. And folks would like to harp on the fact that they were coming from Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we legislated equitable participation. However, ask about the data. Ask about Massachusetts data. Ask about how many people, what does the data show when it comes to equitable participation? How many folks do we see actually getting licenses in this industry? Ask them how it is that when your own equity program participants ask you as commissioners and call out injustices that we see here in the legalization space, in the licensing space, instead of having a conversation, the mode of operation, the choice of action is to send out threat letter to their equity participants and their families. That ask them about those questions, hold them accountable for this, and let's make no mistake, legalization is moving quickly. You know, the last time we met, we had yet another state legalized, and if we do not hold equity at the center of these conversations, it's not going to get there. You're going to have folks backtracking and trying to think, we have maxed out on the licenses like in Colorado that we've issued, but we need to do something because we didn't do a social equity program and this is an abomination. What are we going to do at this point? And then, you really are left with an uphill battle where you have folks who are in the groove of legally operating and don't want to be disrupted, if you will. They don't want their businesses disrupted. So it's important that as your foundations are being laid, you have equity at the center of that. And it's okay if you have to disrupt your existing, the status quo to ensure that we have equity. And this is true for every state that's already legal, for states that are going legal, and it's more importantly true on the federal level. Here it is: New York went legal, and then what's his name? Chuck Schumer tweeted, "Now it's time for the federal legalization," and everyone's just like, "Oh wow, he's saying this, so we must be even getting closer to that." Well, we cannot have federal legalization without a conversation about equity. And folks may want to argue, well, that's not right. To say that we should move forward with legalization because folks will continue to get arrested for cannabis. Let's be clear. In all of the states where cannabis has gone legal, where it is legalized, people are still being arrested for cannabis. And what's even worse is that Black and brown folks are being arrested at disproportionately higher rates than when the plant was illegal in these states. So just to say that something is legal does not mean that the arrests are going to stop. In fact, the conversation and the push at the federal level really needs to be remove the language of marijuana on the cannabis, on the schedule. It's listed as a Schedule I drug. So we need to hear conversations around descheduling the plant. And there are folks who want to say, well, hold on a second, it just got legal, now we need to do research. Well, you know what? We've been doing research since the 80s. In fact, in 1988, one of the judges, and I forgot her name now, but you can look this up. It's information, Bing, Google, Yahoo, whatever search engine you want. Look it up. one of the U.S. judges came out and said that, hey, you know what, the issues that we thought with marijuana, the concerns around abuse, the concerns around its harm weren't founded, and there's enough research to say that it can not only be decriminalized, but it should be removed from a Schedule 1 drug. It shouldn't be a Schedule 1. It shouldn't be a Schedule 2. In fact, it probably shouldn't even be scheduled at all. And so if we have that information from, what is that, 32 years ago, plus there's been research all along since then. We've had marijuana, cannabis being used in the medical space for quite some time now. There's plenty of research to support and to debunk all of the arguments against the public safety concerns that people try to raise. The move should not be legalization. It is the for-profit companies that are pushing for legalization. Look, even Uber said, hey, we can't wait for it to go federal, because then we're going to be looking at cannabis delivery. So of course, we're having conversations around legalization, but that is not where the folks who are about the business of equity, when you hear anyone even bring up the war on drugs, you need to say, okay, yes, you're right. We need to do something about the war on drugs. We need to do something about the fact that the cannabis plant was inappropriately placed on classified as a Schedule 1 drug. And we need to start there, deschedule, remove it from the classification. And then we can start talking about taxation and regulation. But if we don't do that, we're going to continue to see piecemeal efforts around social equity across the country. We're going to continue to see a disparity in arrest rates increase, because what we have are certain states putting limits on how much you can have of this plant. And so you have some states say you can have up to 1 ounce, and other states saying you can have up to 3 ounces, other states saying there's no limit, other states saying we don't want to see you having plants in your home, you can't grow it, others, and folks are literally fighting for these different elements of it, where if we move to say, hey, look, it's not a Schedule 1 drug at all, let's just talk about taxation and regulation, then it's a whole different conversation. And we can really focus on ground our conversations around equity in terms of equity and ownership. So looking at what measures need to be in place, both in statute and then in terms of policy, to ensure that those who have been harmed by the war on drugs can now participate, and whether that participation looks like being able to get a job in the industry, whether that participation looks like being able to open up businesses in this industry, or if that participation looks like being able to simply enjoy the plant without any trauma, without the fear of being arrested for it. So that's when we can get into those conversations. So we really have to get at the root of that. And so I quickly shifted gears there, going from talking about what we see happening here in Massachusetts. And I don't make light of it. I actually want to circle back to the fact that our Commissioner Flanagan has resigned effective April 30th of this year to join Vicente Sederberg on the national front. Vicente Sederberg has a strong presence in this space. They've been trekking with legalization for several decades now. So they have a track record in terms of being able to go into states, assist in regulating, and then assist operators in terms of obtaining licenses in those states. And in some states where it's a free-for-all, that makes sense. But then we have states like Massachusetts that's highly regulated. We even have caps on the number of licenses that you can have ownership in. Yet we see those who have a relationship with Vicente Sederberg serving as their legal representative in obtaining a license. They have equity shares in these businesses, but because they fall under the threshold, which is a 10% equity shareholder threshold, they don't violate the law. So again, I guess when you're at the table making the rules and the regulations around what it is, then you know all the loopholes and you know how to successfully navigate it for your constituents. And so that's why it's important that we hold folks accountable. We need to continue to ask the hard questions. Connecticut is next in line for legalization. And if you look in Connecticut, you have a lot of folks pushing that conversation and, you know, putting their dollars behind saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not just going to legalize in our state. You need to do something around equity. You need to make sure that we have provisions in place so that those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs, that those who have been harmed by the war on drugs are the ones who are benefiting from not just participating in the industry. I think the dispute there is really around language that they are the owners, not working for multi-state operators in like top positions and so forth, but the actual owners, the actual decision makers. And there is a key difference there. Because you see, when you are the decision maker, you are your boss. The minute you have to submit yourself to someone else, and even though it may look good in terms of for diversity purposes in portfolios and looking at leadership within the in the industry, yes, we want to see a diverse manager population when it comes to the cannabis industry. However, you can always be fired. And we've seen that here, even in Massachusetts, where we had, you know, a well-known public figure, shout out to Kim Napoli, who played also an integral role in legalization here in Massachusetts. And her story made national news in terms of how it was that she has played that significant role, and then also sat in a leadership role assisting one of Massachusetts' largest local operator. And after that operator was then acquired by a multi-state operator, and recently, as of, I think it was last month, or was it the beginning of this month? I think it was the beginning of this month, they let her go. And so now what does that say in terms of the value around equity? And I guess the question now would be, well, who are you putting in her place, and what are you doing to ensure that your leadership is diverse? But that wasn't really the point of me bringing that up. The point really is we need to ensure that wherever you are, and my Massachusetts folks, this means Flanagan leaving means we have another seat opened up, and there can be no compromise in terms of who they put in that seat. Commissioner Flanagan came in to serve in the seat that they define as the public safety role. Well, public safety and equity go hand in hand. And when we talk about what public we want to keep safe, we are talking about those who have not had equitable access to this plant. So we want to make sure that whoever the governor appoints is someone that has a strong handle on equity and public safety, and then can come to the commission with bold measures that are going to support equitable participation. And when I say bold, meaning they're going to say, hey, they're going to have conversations around social consumption, because we need to ensure that our communities have access to a safe space where they can enjoy and participate in the plant. Right now, because social consumption is sitting on the back burner, and we don't have anyone in the commission turning around, putting that pressure on the legislature saying, hey, we need to move this forward because we need to ensure the public safety of our community, because not everyone has a safe place to access the plant. Then we need to have someone in that position that can do that. And so that's the call to the governor as they start to look at applicants and potential replacements for Flanagan's position. And for those of you who Flanagan may be working with your state through Vicente Sederberg, you want to hold them to the fire and say, okay, well, what are you doing for equity? Vicente Sederberg and any other major operators, and whether it's an ancillary business such as a law firm that has a strong presence in your state, or it's actual multi-state operators, hold them to the fire and ask them, what is your what are you doing for equity? What is your track record for equity? And how is what you're bringing to our state going to help us? And if they aren't doing that, you need to reach out to your legislators. You need to reach out to your governor, your representatives, and tell them, no, we don't want this. We don't want to see anything presented that's simply a benefit for profitable businesses. We want to see something that's a benefit for profitable businesses, but also addresses equity. It has to do that first. The first point and entry point for the conversation needs to be equity. And then we talk about how do we ensure that businesses are able to be profitable and there isn't an over regulation or the barrier to entry is so high that even our regular citizens who want to enter into this industry aren't able to do so, and only those with the deep pockets are able to do so. So, yeah, thank you, those of you who have been hopping in, joining in. We're live both on Facebook and on YouTube, and talking about equity in cannabis, the latest news that are happening, of things that are happening around the country, but specifically grounding our conversation here in Massachusetts for several reasons. Massachusetts likes to call itself first in the nation when it comes to social equity, because we have legislative language around equitable participation, something that we don't see a lot of other states doing, and folks in other states need to be pushing that. And then also because Massachusetts has taken a stance in terms of what they being very public with the data and information. And then also, this is Cannabis Equity News with Cynthia Mompoint, and Cynthia Mompoint is in Massachusetts right now. So that's why you hear a lot of the conversation grounded in Massachusetts, what Massachusetts is doing. And a lot of folks look to the people coming out of our state, whether it's our commissioners or other folks who have played a role in legalizing, as you see Vicente Sederberg tapping the shoulders of Commissioner Flanagan. And so, the question, my outside question for that is, well, how long have you been tapping that shoulder, and did that play a role also in the commissioners as a whole not addressing the fact that so many multi-state operators took advantage of the priority status and entered into our market? And when the commission was presented with the solution, instead of taking that solution and saying, hey, here is a way to really put the vehicles that we have existing in place in action and make amends for the oops that we had when we first opened up licensing. Instead, they pretty much shut that down completely and have and tried to close us out with a threat letter. And let's be clear, the threat letter said, if we continue to behave this way, and I presume behaving this way means myself as a Black woman, vocal and acknowledging what the agency's role is, areas that they can improve and actually take action that's going to have meaningful impact in this space of equity, and things that they intentionally did not do, and calling them out on that, then so be it, I guess. However, it is what it is, and to hold fault for that to the point that you would draft, I think this letter is signed by the commissioners, the commission chair, which is Chairman Hoffman, the attorney, Christine Bailey, and then the executive director, Sean Collins. And we reached out to Sean Collins directly to sit down and ask for a conversation to talk about what can we do to move the needle in this area of equity. And he rejected that. He rejected it, and the response that we got was a letter. So Massachusetts wants to say we're first in the nation. We're holding Massachusetts to that. Here it is. We've given solutions. And as we move forward, we're going to be looking at these positive impact plans. That was something else that Flanagan was known for, more so than the social justice chair, to look at these positive impact plans and ask, well, how is this actually positively impacting the community? And so we see now both the newer commissioners asking these questions, which is that's what we want to see. However, one of the provisions that Flanagan did put in once COVID hit was that there was like a 90-day window. So right now, technically, businesses don't have to do equity because of COVID. And when the emergency state is fully lifted, when Governor Baker fully lifts the emergency state that we are in because of the pandemic and so forth, that 90 days after that is when existing operators in the state have to demonstrate that they've done anything around equity. And I think that's an abomination. Again, the stance is equity needs to be at the forefront. It needs to be the center of the conversation. It needs to be the lens through which everyone is looking at this. And equity is encompassing, as you can see with the people who are in our equity programs. It is encompassing. So if we take that stance, it's not to say that there are folks who are going to be left out, it's going to disrupt the status quo, and that is the white male ownership status quo, the white male decision maker status quo, and that's okay. That's what we have to do. The effects of the war on drugs were real and are continuing to occur, and we haven't taken the time to address it fully. Folks want to throw things at the wall and say, hey, it didn't work over there, so we can't do it here. No, that's not the case. We look at places where, for example, in California, in Oakland, and in I don't know if it's San Francisco or LA, wherever they have their equity programs, and folks want to say, oh, it didn't work out when they rolled it out. However, they are constantly revamping it and tweaking it to ensure that we are making progress in the space of equity. And so that's what we brought to the table with the PIES program here in Massachusetts. It's okay, we identified the positive impact plans, we identified the equity program participants, and providing them with technical assistance, but there's still a gap that is preventing us from seeing the numbers and level of participation that we can have here. And the PIES program accounts for that gap. In fact, Forefront Ventures, Chris Crane, he's actually implemented a version of the PIES program. And of course, he's not going to call it the PIES program because we're the ones that put it out. He's implemented that with an economic empowerment program participant here in Massachusetts. That's what they're working on it in the Boston area. So it's grounded in the sense that the operating businesses play their role in terms of supporting the industry, supporting equitable participation, demonstrating that they are doing good practices, being good corporate citizens, if you will, conscious cannabis corporations, if you will, here in the state. And instead of having that being backed by the state to say, hey, but this makes sense, and then we're holding them accountable to the level of the revenues that they're making here. That's what the PIES program does. It's not something to say every single operator has to do this the same way. Absolutely not. We couldn't imagine telling a micro business to implement positively an impact of the community at the same level that a multi-state operator that has 3 vertically integrated businesses in our state, a tier 1 cultivation operation that has been growing successfully, we wouldn't expect them to contribute and impact the community positively in the same manner. And so this is how PIES is designed to account for the fact that we have the disparity in operators here that are benefiting and generating a significant amount of revenue, and they're simply checking off a box in terms of what they're doing for positive impact, and we don't have anyone at the commission yet who has demonstrated when it comes to the renewal aspect of the licenses that they're holding these people accountable to the level that these companies are profiting in our state. So that's something that we're going to keep our eyes here on in terms of Cannabis Equity News, looking at what are our commissioners doing when it's time for renewal. And these companies are telling the state what it is that they did to positively impact the community. And the community can play a role and say, hey, we want to see PIEs implemented. We want to see these larger corporations that are here to stay. They're not going to be shut down. You might be successful in boycotting one. However, we have hundreds of licenses that were given to multi-state operators who no one's talking about the fact that these operators are, enjoying the fruits and the benefits, if you will, of legalization here in Massachusetts. And what they're doing in terms of equity, or they're not even addressing the targeted areas for folks that were harmed by the war on drugs, communities that were harmed by the war on drugs. So here it is, the PIES program does that, and it does it in a very, very structured manner, and it aligns with things that we're already doing in Massachusetts and other sectors. So to say that it's so far left field, it's not. It's influenced, and elements and components from it are gleaned from other areas in the state and other programs, government-funded programs like the AA program and so forth. It's grounded in those things. So yes, I'm going to push PIES. Why? Because I see how successful we can be in actually affecting equity at the ownership level. And we talk about PIES starting with economic empowerment certificate holders, because they have a charge to hire 75% of their staff to be folks who have a CORI, folks who have been harmed by the war on drugs, which means that these economic empowerment certificate holders, when they open up their businesses, can then turn around and tap in and support the social equity program participants by providing them with opportunities, whether they be entry level opportunities, whether it be job opportunities with their entities, or whether it be managerial positions with their businesses, or even supporting them in other creative fashion, which we don't go too much into detail in terms of the amount of information we've put out to date regarding PIES, but it's a very strong and robust program that would allow for the success of the legislative mandate here in Massachusetts, and everyone playing their role, from the government to the industry stakeholders to the community at large. So yes, we want that, and hopefully the person that the governor appoints in this next position is going to be someone that has their ear, eyes, and mind centered around equity, and is able to bring that conversation to the table and support those who are talking about equity at the commission level, and see to it that it doesn't fall to the wayside the way things like the legislative bill around a social equity fund has fallen to the wayside. So hopefully those conversations resurface. PIES is something that can be implemented right now. As I said, it's already being done in some form or fashion. And there are other operators who are in the queue to open up, and some who have actually opened up that have been able to partner with existing operators in a PIES-like fashion. And so they themselves can speak up and say how beneficial it was to be able to partner with an existing operator and have that support moving forward. Does it dilute the equity and ownership of minority-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, these smaller entities? No, it does not. In fact, the way PIES is structured, every operator would still own 100% of their business unless they so choose to engage with, equity, sell equity shares with capital investments for capital investment purposes and so forth. So that is my pitch in terms of PIES, again, in a nutshell, and how that ties into equity here in Massachusetts. Flanagan, carry on with Vicente Sederberg. Perhaps you have gleaned some equity perspective and understanding in terms of the power, importance, and role that municipalities, that the government, that key decision makers around policy and regulatory action, the role that they play in terms of ensuring that equity is actually effectuated in the state, even if it's not in the legislative, if it's not mandated, there's still a role that the regulatory body plays, and that you are able to bring that on the national front to the people that you will ultimately be working with. Stay tuned, I guess, on to see how that flows out. And so with that, I think we had number 17, state number 7, the 17th state to go legal, New Mexico. Cool. And, the conversation is constantly the same. New Mexico has gone legal, and here it is. What does that mean for equity? And I hear a lot of folks kind of separate this conversation around home grow and equity. I personally don't see it as being distinct. I think there's a level of agency that folks should have when it comes to being able to access the plant. This is a form of equitable participation. And so if you do not have the financial resources to or the means to get to the plant that you in the stores when they become available recreationally, however, you are able to, you have a green thumb and you're able to grow your own, then that should be woven into it. I don't make that distinction, although folks do. And the reason why I have a problem with that is because there are certain populations who, for them, they weren't affected by the war on drugs. They weren't. And so they just want to be able to grow their weed in their house with no problem. And, if people who were harmed by the war on drugs, the communities that were harmed, if there's resources set aside for them, sure. If not, okay, whatever, it doesn't affect them. And so I don't make a distinction between that. I fold it in because, again, like I say, if you address equity, if equity is at the center, then everyone is addressed. Why? Because in order for you to address equity, you have to reach out to the marginalized populations. And by reaching out to the marginalized populations, you bring in everyone. And yes, there are some folks who have enjoyed privileges, and it will be disrupted, but that's okay. Hence the reason why we have the conversation of equity. And if it wasn't for the disproportionate impact that the war on drugs had on certain populations, we would not be talking about legalization the way that we're talking about it now, because that is the flag that was raised in so many of these states that have gone legal. Oh, we are arresting people unjustly. We need to address the drug war and the harms. The war on drugs is over. Sidebar, it is not over. People are still being arrested. So nip that in the bud. It is not over until it is not scheduled. So as long as it's scheduled, the war still exists. Our children are being attacked, punished, if you will, attacked. They still have that target on their back. And if you know anything about the school to prison pipeline, this is how it starts. You have officers in the schools. You have students who may get caught with having marijuana on their persons, and now they are arrested. A record is opened up for them. They are taken away from the schooling, and it begins. The school to prison pipeline begins, if it had not begun already, just from other regular infractions and being in schools. So the war on drugs has not ended. And so that's why it's important that we have equity at the center of these conversations. Uber wants to come in, great. Let them come in, make sure they're however capacity in your state, they have to come in under some equity provisions. In Massachusetts, it's interesting. This, for those of you who have been tracking with the delivery licenses, how they've played out so far, we have an exclusivity period for the next 3 years where only those participants in the equity programs can obtain the delivery licenses. So if you want to be a deliverer, if you want to participate in delivery in Massachusetts, you either have to be a equity program participant to deliver on the rec side, or you open up a delivery marijuana transporter business on the medical side. And I guess the third option would be you partner with equity program participants, knowing that they have to maintain 51% ownership of the business, but that's not a problem. There's still plenty of room to do business with folks. So when you have large operators such as an Uber having conversation about doing delivery, if they want to provide the capital to support equity businesses and then have certain supports in terms of technical assistance, that's great. But in terms of having equity in businesses, the cap is 3 licenses here in Massachusetts. So they would not be able to take full advantage here in this highly regulated space. And I believe there were some provisions that were in place that now you can only have 1. So if you provide some type of technical support to a delivery business, you can only do that for that 1 delivery business. That 3 business cap does not apply to you. And that's a whole nother conversation. I think we're going to see delivery come up again in the near future as we have some of our initial licenses go up for provisional license. So we're going to see applications being reviewed, and we're going to see how the CCC reviews these applications. Will it be with the same level of scrutiny, which was not that much when it came to multi-state operators? I shouldn't say, let me not dismiss the work of the staff of the Cannabis Control Commission, because I do not know what the staff do. I know what it's like to be a staff member in an agency, in a state agency here in Massachusetts, and be on a team that works significantly hard to get things done because we have to answer to the public. I also witnessed teams that did absolutely nothing. So I have no clue what it's like to be a staff member at the CCC. But what we do have is the data in terms of who were the operators that have been licensed, gone through the process, received their provisional license, gone through the background check, the extensive background checks that they've done, and received their final licenses and are now operating. And some of these businesses, you would have to question the ethics and the morale, especially if you're going to send me a threat letter because I'm calling out what I recognize as unfair business practices. So if I'm getting a threat letter and I haven't even submitted a license, some of these operators who have history in other states for discriminatory practices in their businesses, racial complaints, lawsuits, and so forth, and they're still getting licenses here in Massachusetts. You know, in the front of my mind, I'm thinking of MedMen and so forth, and then the companies tied to MedMen. Pursuing licenses. I'm not going to jump into Cambridge tonight. However, that is coming down the pike. Yes, I did do that drop. So if anyone is tracking with us and takes the time to listen, you heard it here. That conversation is coming up because there is a lot going on. However, there's some positive traction happening there. So stay tuned for that. But we have been quite some time. This is supposed to be Cannabis Equity Minutes, not Cannabis Equity Hours, but they're, breaking news today with the departure of Commissioner Flanagan, and not just the fact that she's departing, but to hear where she's going and putting that in the context of things happening in Massachusetts and highlighting the opportunity that presents for the commission, for the governor, and for us as a state in terms of having someone else join the commission that has the lens of equity and public safety. So we don't want to hear folks arguing about or putting out the false narrative around impaired driving or and some of the other misinformation that circulates under the guise of public safety when we have the research that shows that that's not the case with cannabis. Public safety conversations need to be centered around equity, and that tends to focus on access. That's it. We want to minimize access with our with children. We want to increase access to those who need it and increase safe access to those who want to participate in it. So, 'tis all for now. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned. This Friday we'll be at our regular Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint, Friday, 8 p.m. And the Cannabis Control Commission will be having their meeting. So again, it'll be grounded in a lot of conversation in Massachusetts. However, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more states pull the trigger on legalization in their space, and then seeing the continued conversation at the federal level. And again, we want to make sure that they're not just talking about legalizing. We want to address the people who have been harmed by this, who are still arrested. We want to see everybody. If someone is in prison right now because of a marijuana offense, we want to make sure that they are released. This is equity. How are you going to ensure equitable participation in the legal industry when you have folks still locked up in the for participating in the plant, still locked up in our prison system, in the criminal legal system? Let's not call it justice until we see justice. So we want to make sure that those conversations are taking place as well. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up this evening. Feel free to reach out to us. I know a couple of folks have been reaching out to us. Send us a message, provide your comments, weigh in. Let us know what's happening in your state. Let us know what's happening in your municipality here in Massachusetts. There's a lot that's happening on the local level, and we want to continue to highlight equity where we see equity taking place, where we see businesses, towns, communities actually doing that. So you're going to hear more about that because we want to put out what we want to see more of. And with that, have a great evening. I'm going to end here.